I have two questions, and in a minute, I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and answer one of those questions. I understand that not everyone enjoys this kind of exercise. And if that is the case, please indicate that to your neighbor, and they can allow you your space as they turn to perhaps a different neighbor. For those at home who are watching on the stream, if you are with others, please feel free to answer either question. If you are alone, please perhaps contemplate or write down what your answer might be. So here are the two questions. Again, feel free to answer one, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. And here it is. When is a time you felt othered? When is a time you felt othered? And when is a time you felt truly seen? Let us begin. Excellent. You are all very good talkers and listeners. I started it, I know. See, the real question today is pretty simple. When we say us, who is us? I've reviewed so many communications through the years that really use us and them language. When I arrived at UUCF, I worked together with our staff in the congregation to minimize and reduce that kind of language in our communications. Us and them language in a congregation can be a very bad sign of an unhealthy congregational system. What it basically says is, we are this thing, and in order to be part of this thing, you have to learn who we are and conform to that. And when you do, you will no longer be them. You will be one of us. It's one of the reasons that I like to say that with each new member, the congregation shifts, changes, and grows. Because it becomes something different than it was before. Part of the issue here is leaving space for stories we have yet to hear or stories behind stories. About not making assumptions or jumping to conclusions. It's about being open, it's about listening, and most of all, it is about approaching things with a spirit of curiosity. I know that I've talked about a spirit of curiosity before, but it is so important. A spirit of curiosity is like the antidote to the kind of othering that comes from assumptions, jumping to conclusions, self-righteousness, and frankly, things like bigotry and othering. When we are shifting and changing, we are shifting and changing all the time as a congregation, and I'm seeing many more folks here who have traditionally been on the margins of our larger society each week in this congregation, especially young folks in our religious education program. And although we've done some good work over the last number of years on building awareness about our own tendencies as a mostly white, mostly middle class, upper middle class UU congregation, there is always more work to do about who we are and what that means around being an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, inclusive community. Now, I freely admit, when I see people in different situations and maybe look at the car they're driving or the way that they're driving their car or the way they've dressed, or I hear people talking in a coffee shop, or I interact with someone at the grocery store, it's quite possible when these observations happen that I will maybe come to some quick story about them in my head. Of course, whatever that story is, if I talk with them or get to know them, that story can change significantly. That's actually one of the fascinating things about memorial services. I've learned so much about people that I would never have known when those from different facets of someone's life share a story that shows a completely different side than I ever would have known or seen. When we hear stories, when we are curious, when we truly listen, the us and theming can really change. Now, I will tell you what I think is incredibly destructive, and that is making up stories. Stories based on stereotypes, stories based on half-truths or insinuations or rumors or blatant lies. Making up stories can serve to further divide or even tear us apart. Sometimes made-up stories are designated to create tears in our incredibly delicate social fabric. We should all be very wary of those stories. Stories, for instance, about pet eating by members of some group of people being demonized for political purposes. With invitation being this month's worship theme, I would like to extend an invitation for us to practice invitation. I would like to extend an invitation for all of us to engage with an acquaintance or a friend, perhaps a family member, not in a weird or incredibly uncomfortable way, but being heartfelt and curious. Ask them one of the two questions posed today. When have you felt othered, and when have you felt truly seen? And here's another thing. When they respond, listen. Don't think about the next question. Don't think about what you might say in response. Don't think about the thing it brings up in you. You know, when that happened to me, at least not until they're done talking. Just truly listen, because as it has been said, listening is not an act of the ear. Listening is an act of the heart. Then see if it gives you a different sense of the meaning of the words us and them. See if it changes anything in you. See if your definition of us moves in one direction or another. These are strange and difficult times. There's a lot of us and them happening in our world. Some based in thousands of years of religion. Some based in artificially designed geographical borders. Some based on uneducated fears of others. Certainly, some based on the dangerous and destructive strategies of political candidates. My invitation today is to not be a part of reinforcing anything that makes it so easy for us to break up into tribes, cliques, or groups with some artificially constructed barriers to belonging. Let us, even if it challenges our comfort some, let us be a part of the bridgers of the gaps in our common humanity. Let us be the listeners. Let us be the curious. Let us not be part of the problem, but part of a solution of inclusion as we continue to weather the storms of the day and the rocky waters to come. May that be so, and amen.